Chapter 31. The Task Fights Back. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 24 June 1995. Hogwarts Quidditch Pitch, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Regardless of the fact that Harry knew the strategy that he was going to use for the third task of the TriWizard tournament to combat the maze, its enchantments, and the various magical creatures within it, and the fact that he had absolutely nothing to worry about, his nerves still got the better of him the closer the time came to the start of the third task. This meant that, when it came to dinner, he was more inclined to push his food around his plate than to actually eat it. Sirius, though with assistance from Daphne and Remus, would have none of that. Together, they managed to convince him to at least eat half of it. Truthfully, Harry wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or not. He knew that going into the evening on an empty stomach wasn't a good thing, but by the same token the butterflies in there didn't seem to like having their space crowded with food. "It is almost time for the third task to begin," Headmaster Dumbledore had announced from his podium, causing Harry to drop his fork. "If the champions could make their way down to the Quidditch pitch now, the rest of us will follow along shortly." The four champions had walked somewhat together. There was no talking between them, only looks of intense concentration on each face. Harry couldn't decide which one looked the most confident. All he could tell was that all three were in it to win it, which was fine by him. Ludo Bagman and Bartemius Crouch had been waiting for them at the entrance to the pitch and escorted them the last dozen meters or so. Just before they entered the champion's tent, which was placed just inside and to the right of the entryway, Harry was able to get a brief look up into the stands. Currently, with the school's population still to come down, it looked mostly empty, but there were quite a number of sections beginning to fill up with adults. A shock of recognizable red hair caught his attention, especially when the owner of said hair began pointing in his direction to the man sitting beside him. Harry returned Charlie Weasley's wave as well as the nod from the other man, who Harry could only guess was also connected to the Romanian Dragon Reserve. Just as had been the case for the previous two tasks, the inside of the tent had four small partitions sectioned off, one for each champion, as well as a general area in the middle. Automatically, the four of them began moving towards their area, only to be stopped by Mr. Crouch. "You will have a few minutes with your family and a select few friends, for them to wish you well before we get underway. We will then go through the rules, although you should all know them by now, while the audience is being informed of the same thing. And then the third task will begin. Take the next few minutes to prepare yourselves." With that said, the two men disappeared, leaving the four to their own contemplations. The heavy tread of hundreds of feet passing by the tent told the story of what was happening outside. At the sharp flap of canvas, Harry's head snapped up to see a flow of people coming in. Instantly, he focused on the ones obviously for him. "Good luck, pup," Sirius said, giving him a brief hug while Remus clapped him on the shoulder. "No matter what happens out there, we're proud of you." "If you get a chance, do you think you could get me a cutting of that hedge?" Neville asked. "Considering how quickly it grew, it's got to be magical." "I'll see what I can do, Nev," Harry grinned. "Seriously, though, good luck in there, Harry," Neville said. "Good luck, Harry," Susan and Hermione said together, before looking at each other and laughing nervously. That laughter was repeated when the two girls moved to give him a hug at the same time. In the end, the three-way hug was awkward, but brief. "Are you going to tell me what you have planned, Harry?" Daphne asked, stepping forward. "Surely you've worked it out by now," Harry replied with a wry smile. "Prat," she said, grinning and slapping his arm, exactly as she did every time that he'd refused to tell her his strategy. "Seriously, though, Harry, good luck in there, and don't do anything stupid." "Don't plan on it, Daph," Harry replied. When Harry saw her move towards him, he expected a brief hug, just as the others had given him. Instead, Daphne reached up, cupped his face with her hands, leaned in and kissed him. It only lasted a few seconds or perhaps a lifetime. It was simple, sweet, and tasted vaguely of strawberries. Somewhere along the way, Harry found that his hands were now resting on Daphne's hips. As the kiss ended, he opened his eyes to see her cerulean blue eyes shining with something unidentifiable. Friends and family of the champions, it is time for you to take your seats in the stands, Mr. Crouch called, breaking the spell and the moment between the two. Without a word, Daphne stepped back, allowing Harry's hands to fall limply to his sides. Then she turned, her long, silky black hair swishing behind her as she joined the others in disappearing through the tent's flaps. Right then, gather round, everyone, and we'll go through the rules one last time, Mr. Crouch instructed. Mr. Potter, Harry, come along, come along. Almost independent of his own thoughts, Harry joined the others in the center of the tent, but his mind was still trying to process exactly what had just happened. She'd kissed him. Daphne had kissed him. He wanted nothing more than to chase after her and to talk to her, to ask her why, and if he was honest with himself, to repeat the experience. His mind seemed to be stuck in a loop, remembering the feeling of her soft lips pressed against his and wondering why. That really was the big question. Why now? This night was already due to be a long and very important one. There was the task to get through, and within the Dragon Reserve's offer to discuss and decide upon. A decision that had just become 100 times more difficult and important. "Are you listening, Mr. Potter?" Mr. Crouch asked, and the slight hint of exasperation in the man's voice told Harry that that wasn't the first time that he'd been called. "Sorry, what were you saying?" he asked sheepishly. "Right, now that all four of you are paying attention," Mr. Crouch said, giving Harry a look of disapproval. "We can go through the rules for this task. The task is easy enough in principle. You simply make your way to the very center of the maze, and the first to touch the TriWizard Cup is the winner. If you get into any trouble in there that you can't handle on your own, simply send up red sparks, and one of the professors who will be patrolling the outside of the maze will come in and get you. That will, of course, instantly disqualify you from the task. Mr. Crumb will enter first, followed by Mr. Diggory 12 seconds later, Miss Delacour 47 seconds after that, and lastly Mr. Potter 5 minutes and 3 seconds after that. You are only allowed to take your wand in with you, and summoning of objects from outside the maze is strictly forbidden and will instantly disqualify you. This last part was said with Mr. Crouch looking firmly at Harry. For his part, he simply gave a wry grin. He suspected that this wasn't one of the original rules, but since he had used a summoning charm to get what he needed in both of the other two tasks, he couldn't exactly blame them for adding it in. "I think that's everything. If there are no questions, good. When you hear your name, you may enter the stadium." With that, Mr. Crouch left the tent, leaving the four champions standing loosely in a circle, nervously eyeing each other. Thankfully, that only lasted for a moment before the sound of Ludo Bagman's amplified voice filtered in. "Without further ado, I give you your TriWizard Champions." A great roar and the sound of hundreds of people clapping and cheering filled not only the stadium, but the tent, making it difficult to hear. Representing Durmstrang Institute of Magic, Victor Crumb. Harry didn't think it was possible, but somehow the cheers, screams, and general roar doubled as the Bulgarian champion and Quidditch star emerged from the tent. A homegrown champion, representing Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Cedric Diggory. If there was a difference in the cheers for the victor and Cedric, Harry certainly couldn't pick it. Representing Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic, Fleur de Lacquer. As Fleur exited the tent to the cheers of the crowd, Harry readied himself, knowing that he'd be called next. And lastly, our fourth champion, representing Stonewall High, Harry Potter. As Harry emerged from the tent, it was to find that the sound in the tent was actually being muffled. Hundreds, no thousands of people were jammed into the stadium, all of whom were on their feet clapping and cheering, whistling and stomping. Nervously, Harry raised his hand in acknowledgement. It was at that moment that a dozen bright flashes assaulted him from the reporters that he hadn't noticed before. "Champions, if you would stand here," Mr. Crouch directed. Harry found himself lined up beside the other champions facing the, as promised, now 10-foot high hedge maze. Deep shadows lined the area beside it, and Harry could only guess how dark and gloomy it would be actually inside there. Directly across from where they were standing was a small gap, no larger than the width of an ordinary door, the only entrance to the maze. "On the sound of the cannon, the TriWizard tournament shall begin," Ludo Bagman announced to the crowd. Instantly, Victor took off in a sprint that would do an Olympic runner proud. Within seconds, he disappeared inside the maze. This time it was Cedric's turn to dash into the maze. While he was nowhere near as fast as Victor, he was no slouch either. There was only a slightly longer pause this time before Fleur raced off to enter the maze behind her fellow competitors. And then it was time for Harry to simply stand around and wait. He considered sitting, but thought that that might be giving the game away a smidgen too early. Idly, his gaze wandered around the stadium, and it wasn't long before he found himself frowning. There was absolutely nothing to enable any of the spectators to see what was happening inside the maze. The hedge walls were far too high to allow most of the people in the stands to see over them, and of those that probably could, it'd be too dark to see anything. Oh, maybe some flashes of color every now and then if and when a spell was used, but that wouldn't really tell anyone much. Harry simply had to shake his head. Whoever had designed these tasks seemed to have absolutely no regard for those watching. This was the second one now, where the spectators couldn't see what was happening, having to simply wait until the end to find out who won. At least with the second task, Harry provided some entertainment. That wouldn't be the case this time. In his idle staring around and musing, Harry'd lost track of the time and had been startled at the unexpected sound. Gathering himself, he trotted off to the entrance of the maze. Passing through the opening, he found that it immediately branched off to either side. Choosing at random, Harry turned right and continued jogging for another couple of meters before stopping with a smile, looking around and promptly sitting down. Inside the maze really was as dark and shadowy as he'd expected. In the dim light, it was near impossible to see any further than maybe 5 meters in any direction. Originally, Harry'd planned to whittle while he waited. His small collection had grown to 5 so far: dragon, goblin, unicorn, merman, and house elf. And he'd not long started on an Abraxan, one of the winged horses that apparently pulled the Beauxbatons' carriage from France to Hogwarts. This would have been an ideal time to get a lot further on in its creation. Wiggling around to get himself comfortable, he really had no idea how long this was going to take, and he wouldn't be surprised if it lasted an hour or two. Harry found himself leaning back into the hedges. The leaves and twigs were a bit sharp and pointy and scratchy in places, but by wiggling and shifting about, he eventually managed to find a position that he was certain that he could relax in for quite some time to come. Deciding that it had been a big day already, and knowing that he'd be up quite late that night, Harry closed his eyes, intent on getting some rest. The sudden tightening of something over various parts of his body snapped his eyes, open bare moments before his world went absolutely crazy. But in those moments, Harry was able to recognize that something had grabbed hold of both his ankles, his thighs, arms, stomach, and chest, holding him tightly and making it impossible for him to move in any direction. And then he was dragged backwards into the hedge. Sharp twigs and branches jabbed into his body in every which way. His head was knocked from side to side, even as his mouth was filled with leaves, preventing him from crying out in shock and fear. The world went pitch black, and he could hear his clothes tearing, feel his skin being pierced and scratched. His glasses were knocked askew and were barely hanging on to one ear. As quickly as it began, Harry was ejected from the hedge, the plant tendrils unwinding at such speed that he was sent spinning. rolling across the ground before he came to rest up against the opposite hedge wall. Realizing what the sharp and leafy object was against his side, sent Harry rolling back the way he came until he came to rest face down in the middle of the pathway. With a groan, he lifted his head and righted his glasses. His body hurt in dozens of places from the brief passage through the hedge, and it was all he could do to push himself to his hands and knees. Wherever he was, it looked identical to where he'd just left. There was the same deep gloom and two identical hedges, no longer quite so innocent, lined either side of him. Slowly he stood up, spitting the last of the leaves from his mouth and picking bits of twigs and other plant material from his clothes, and even from where they'd pierced his skin. Blood oozed from a dozen places that he could see, and his left foot felt a little tender to stand on, but overall, he decided that he was in one piece. "Now where am I?" he muttered, absently sticking one of the larger bits of hedge into his pocket to give to Neville later. His best guess was the next aisle over, making him marginally closer to the center of the maze. Suspiciously, he looked back at the maze that he'd just come through, but right now, it was sitting idle, displaying no more signs of life than any other plant. Well, apart from the whooping willow and some of those other plants that Neville had once shown him in Greenhouse 3. Deciding that his best bet was to get back closer to the start of the maze, Harry started off to the left. He'd barely gone 5 meters when the hedges to either side of him, and stretching down as far as he could see, began leaning inwards. Tendrils and branches shot across the pathway, linking up with their counterparts and entwining together to form an impenetrable wall blocking his path within moments. "Right, not that way then," Harry said. He knew that they'd been told that there'd be enchantments in the maze, but he never imagined that that would mean the hedge would work against them. When he'd done nothing but take a couple of steps backwards, the maze must have decided that he needed an additional prompt, for it slowly began bringing its blockage forward, forcing him backwards at a faster and faster pace. Harry's mind raced as he trotted down the path. Somewhere on the other side of the hedge to his left was the original path that he'd entered on, and that, he knew, led to the outside world. Finally, a corner appeared, but instead of to the left where he wanted to go, this one turned right, deeper into the maze. Deciding that he'd had enough, Harry drew his wand and pointed it at the hedge. His mind flicked back to the lesson that he'd had with Professor Flitwick before he focused fully on the task at hand. Incendio. Instantly, in the white-hot fire that he'd created, a hole in the hedge appeared, burnt straight through. But before Harry could take advantage of it, the hedge around the hole shot out tendrils and branches to seal the breach and to close the gap. He glanced to the path behind him, but he had no intention whatsoever of going deeper into the maze. Who knew what he'd find in there if the Vera plants were this dangerous? And unfortunately, he knew that if he stayed still too long, the hedges would get it into their heads. That he needed some more prompting to get moving again. Well, if I can't go over it, and I've got no idea how to get around it, that just leaves under or over, Harry mused. And then, after looking at the ground, right, over it is. The problem now was that the hedges were 10 feet high, far too high to jump, and he suspected that the hedges wouldn't like being climbed, or stood upon, he decided. Time to get a little creative, Harry mused. He paced backwards and forwards a few times, looking up at the hedge surrounding him. His mind whirled, trying to work out a way around his problem. If he only had a knife, at least that'd be something to work with. But if he was going to wish for something that he didn't have, then why not go full out and wish for his trunk? In there, in his workroom, was all the tools and materials he'd need to build or create anything that he'd need. Suddenly, Harry froze mid-step. In there were exactly the things that he needed, or at least Thaddeusarf which he could use. His mind flittered about, wood, book, dollhouse, and a small smile appeared on his face. Spinning around, Harry leveled his wand at the maze, took careful aim and cast the most powerful cutting spell he knew. It wasn't much, but a couple of twigs and a tendril dropped to the ground, and Harry pounced on them. Idly, he raised one hand and a ball of light appeared to hover up and away, bathing the area in a soft, golden glow. Then, bringing the pages of the book that Sirius had recently given him on magical woodworking to mind, he began to work. The first thing that he had to do was enlarge the twigs and then reduce them into planks. Taking two, he used his wand to carve them into large ovals, nearly twice the size of his feet. They weren't pretty and looked horribly wrong, but for what he wanted them for, he knew that they'd do. Each plank then had half a dozen holes bored through them, and the tendrils threaded through the holes. 3 more quick cutting curses at the plant produced enough twigs for the next part of his plan. These twigs were placed under a series of ingorgios, some more than others. Using his wandless magic, Harry moved the now trunk-sized twigs into place, balancing some on top of others until he'd fashioned himself a rough staircase that reached as high as the hedge. Grabbing up his oval planks, Harry scrambled up the staircase to stand at the very top. From here, he could see the maze stretching away into the distance. The lights from the stadium even lit up the tops of the hedges, making it possible for him to plot a course deeper into the maze towards the center. In a couple of places, Harry could see a shimmering golden mist, and in others, the hint of movement, but whether from plant life, creatures, or champions was impossible to tell. Having placed his oval planks on the top trunk step, Harry stepped onto them and bent and worked at tying the tendrils around each foot as tightly as possible. Standing back up, he tested each one by lifting his foot and the plank that it was now attached to. Satisfied, he nodded. He now had some snowshoes, or more properly, head shoes, to hopefully allow him to move about Ontipov the maze. Hesitantly, Harry stepped out. The ground felt very unstable, but he could stand on the hedge, however wobbly he was. Deliberately turning his back on the center of the maze, Harry plotted out his course and began walking. Each step was an adventure. Remembering to swing each leg wide so that the planks didn't catch on each other was essential. But slowly, deliberately, Harry began making his way towards the outer wall of the maze. Twice he had to change directions when the maze before him decided to shift about. But finally, he was there. Looking down, Harry could see the ground. The crowd, he knew, had been yelling and screaming for ages, but he'd deliberately not listened to a word that they were saying. This, he knew, was going to hurt. Nevertheless, Harry jumped, leaping from the maze and the competition. For him, the TriWizard tournament was over. Chapter 32. Wants, Needs, and Regrets. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 24 June 1995. Hogwarts Quidditch Pitch, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Jumping from a height of 10 feet is never a good idea. Jumping from a height of 10 feet with a pair of large boards strapped to your feet was only ever going to end in disaster. Harry intended on landing with his knees bent and rolling with the momentum. But he didn't take into account his footwear. There was no way that he was going to roll. Instead, the boards tangled together and he ended up face-planting. Everything hurt, but especially his right ankle, from which he'd heard a suspiciously ominous crack when he landed, and his nose and tongue, which he'd bitten when his jaw hit the ground. "Ah, good, help's coming," he absently thought as he heard the stampede of feet getting louder. "Harry, are you all right? What were you thinking, jumping from there?" Sirius asked. Let me through," a second voice demanded. A tingling sensation washed over his body before he was gently levitated, rolled over so that he was face up, and laid back on the ground. Madame Pomfrey's wand was a blur as she waved it about it. A wiggling and a slight crack in his nose fixed that injury. A golden glow encompassed his ankle, and he sighed in relief. Numerous other, smaller injuries were similarly wiped away. "Here, Harry, you might need these," Sirius said, handing him his glasses. "Thanks," he said, putting them back on. You understand that by exiting the maze, you forfeit the third task and the TriWizard tournament, don't you, Mr. Potter? Bartemius Crouch asked with a frown. Harry pushed himself up so that he was leaning on his elbows, instead of lying flat on his back. Yep, it's bloody dangerous in there, Harry stated. That was the point, you know, Ludo Bagman stated, to challenge the champions and to test their mettle. Mr. Potter, David Fowle, reporter for the Daily Prophet, a short, stocky man, introduced himself, a piece of parchment and quill floating alongside his head. Can you tell us what happened inside the maze? What challenges you faced that forced you to exit in such a dramatic fashion? First, you have to remember that I never wanted to be in the tournament in the first place, Harry replied. And I never considered myself a champion, the three still in there are true champions. Not to mention the fact that, with my lack of magical education, I was never going to be a serious competitor. One could argue that point, Mr. Potter, Fowle replied. Regardless of your scores, you did successfully complete the previous two tasks. Sheer dumb luck, Harry replied with a shake of his head. I never expected to complete them, thus I never tried. My only goal was to put on a bit of a show for the audience. And tonight, Fowle asked. My goal for tonight was to walk into the maze and to take a seat until it was over, he stated. You never intended to even try, an incredulous Crouch asked. Nope, Harry replied happily. Unfortunately, the maze had other ideas. The hedge grabbed me and dragged me deeper into the maze before closing up passageways that I assume prevented me from getting back to the start again. So, since I couldn't go through it, or around it, I found a way to go over the maze. As he had been saying all of that, Harry had been undoing and discarding his head shoes. Where did you get the materials to make that, Mr. Potter? Crouch asked. The hedge, of course, he replied. A few twigs and a whole bunch of spells. Finally, he was able to stand, gingerly at first as he tested his ankle, but Madame Pomfrey's spells had done the trick, and he was quickly bouncing on it to test it out, a smile on his face. So what's been happening out here? Harry asked. Nothing much. Pretty boring, really. At least until you popped up and began walking about on top of the maze, Sirius shrugged. Harry shook his head. Whoever came up with these tasks are idiots. One underwater and one hidden behind a 10-foot hedge, not exactly conducive to being a spectator event. Harry attempted to follow Sirius back towards the stands where he'd been sitting, but was prevented from doing so by both Crouch and Bagman, who insisted that he remain close to the small stage that had been set up not far from the champion's tent. The next half-hour passed in boredom for Harry. There was nothing to see or do. He tried to find Daphne in the stands, but in the crowds of hundreds or thousands, that was impossible. Not that here would have been the best place for them to have some privacy to talk about what had happened moments before the task had begun. Finally, a brief flash of light in the middle of the stage heralded the arrival of the second person out of the maze, and this one was clutching a trophy in their hand. Your TriWizard Champion of Champions, ladies and gentlemen, Victor Crumb of Durmstrang Institute of Magic. Bagman's enchanted voice boomed across the stadium. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause loud enough to deafen. Over it all, a steady thump and deep bass chant could be heard coming from the Bulgarian section of the crowd. By the time it finally stopped some 10 minutes later, the remaining two champions had been retrieved. Then Harry was made to wait through the presentation ceremony and the many boring speeches from the politicians who all seemed to think that having a captive audience meant that it was the perfect time to do some politicking. The trophy was officially presented to Victor, along with a bag that looked far too small to hold 1,000 galleons, but Harry chalked that up to the wonders of magic. There were photos of Victor, photos of all the champions together, and dozens of others that left spots dancing in Harry's eyes. Finally, Headmaster Dumbledore said the words that Harry had been longing to hear. I now declare the TriWizard Tournament of 1994 and 1995 to be finished. /0v0 / Saturday, 24 June 1995. Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A low grumble, far too low for anyone to make out the words, emanated from Harry as he traveled the spiral staircase up the headmaster's office. This was not where he wanted to be. He wanted to find Daphne. He wanted to finish his conversation with Charlie Weasley and Alexander Velios. Fortunately, they'd been accommodating when Professor McGonagall had interrupted them just after they'd made introductions to say that Headmaster Dumbledore needed a word with Harry. They'd been able to make plans to meet the next day, at least. And more than anything, Harry wanted to just find his bed and crawl into it. It had been a long, long day. "Come in, Harry," Dumbledore called after he'd knocked. Tiredly, Harry entered and trudged across the room to sit in front of one of the chairs in front of the headmaster's desk. "Lemon drop?" Dumbledore asked, holding out a small bowl. "No, thank you," Harry replied. "Firstly, let me congratulate you on getting through the TriWizard tournament," Dumbledore said. "It is truly an achievement, considering your very limited magical education." "Thank you, sir," Harry replied. "I think that I would be correct in assuming that you're wondering why I asked you here." At Harry's nod, he continued, "Before I answer that, can I ask if you have signed the contract with the Dragon Reserves yet?" Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. So this was to be a last-ditch effort to recruit him as a student of Hogwarts, was it? "No, sir. We have plans to meet tomorrow to discuss the offer," Harry replied. "Good, good," Dumbledore replied. "There is still time, then, for me to offer you some information that may assist you in making the wisest choice for your future." "What information?" Harry asked suspiciously. "Tell me, Harry, what do you know about the circumstances of your parents' death?" Harry started at the random change of topic. "Not much. They were killed by Voldemort, who then tried to kill me. But the spell backfired, killing him instead, and left me with this scar," he replied, reaching up to touch his famous lightning bolt. "Basic, but concise," Dumbledore stated. "However, it is Voldemort's reasoning behind the attack that I think is the most important at this time." "His reasons," Harry echoed, before shaking his head. "From what Sirius said, my parents had been fighting against Voldemort, even dueling and escaping him a couple of times. That couldn't have been good for his reputation." "While that in and of itself would ordinarily have been enough for Voldemort, there was another reason," Dumbledore replied. "What reason is that?" Harry asked. "You see, Harry, before you were born, there was a prophecy made about a child that would have the power to vanquish Lord Voldemort," Dumbledore stated. "A prophecy?" Harry asked incredulously. "Seriously, a prophecy? Everyone I've talked to has said that divination is what was it Hermione called it?" Suddenly he snapped his fingers. "That's right, a woolly subject." "To most, it is, Harry. But to those few who have the gift, it is something else," Dumbledore replied. "And the person who made this prophecy does have the gift." "Okay, so there was a prophecy made," Harry said slowly. "What does it say?" "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies." As Dumbledore finished speaking, Harry sat back in his chair, staring at the man. His mind was whirling, trying to understand. Finally, he gave up with a shake of his head. "What does it mean?" Harry asked. "Quite simply, that a child born at the end of July, as you are Harry, whose parents have defied him 3 times, as yours did, would have an unknown power to vanquish Voldemort, and that child and only that child could do so," Dumbledore explained. Then isn't the prophecy complete then?" Harry asked. "Voldemort tried to kill me but couldn't. Somehow, and no one seems to know how, I killed Voldemort. That's why I'm famous in the wizarding world." That would be true, Harry, if you did, in fact, kill Voldemort that night, Dumbledore stated. All we know for sure is that Voldemort was defeated. He was not killed or vanquished as the prophecy requires. He's not dead, Harry asked incredulously. Alas, no, Dumbledore replied. It is my belief that he is nothing more than a disembodied spirit at the present time, but he will return, and when he does, we must be ready. But you don't know for sure, Harry asked. I can assure you that I do. How can you be sure? Harry insisted. There have been signs and warnings, many of which are hard to see, I will admit, but that does not mean that they're not there. You're just going to have to trust me on this, Harry, Dumbledore replied. Why tell me this? Why now? Harry asked. You are the child of the prophecy, Harry, Dumbledore stated, and it is time that you began to ready yourself to fulfill your destiny. When Voldemort returns, it will be here in Britain, and you will be needed here. Here, Harry replied flatly. You think I should be here waiting for an evil Dark Lord to return so that I should face him? Didn't that prophecy say something about either must die at the hands of the other? It did, Harry. Only you will have the power to finally vanquish Voldemort. Yeah, and that he can do the same to me, Harry replied darkly. And what's that power supposed to be anyway? The one thing that Voldemort has never known or appreciated. Love, Dumbledore smiled. Harry stared at the ancient wizard incredulously, just when he thought the conversation couldn't get any weirder. Sorry to break it to you, but I don't swing that way, Harry deadpanned. And even if I did, what do I know of love? I grew up with the Dursleys. Yes, the family of your mother's sister. That is why I placed you there. The bond between families is truly remarkable, Dumbledore told him. Remarkably hateful, yeah, sure, Harry groused. I knew when I left you there that I would be consigning you to many dark years, Harry. And yet you have emerged stronger and more capable of love than you know, Dumbledore replied. The man was an idiot, Harry decided, placing a baby into an abusive environment and expecting it to come out strong and capable of loving. Harry had a hard enough time simply making friends. Yeah, sure, there was Daphne, but even he wasn't sure what that was. That was why he wanted to talk to her so much, so that he could, hopefully, finally work out what all these weird feelings were that he was constantly trying to understand. Deciding to leave that topic alone, he changed tacks. So, if an evil madman is after me, why leave me untrained? Couldn't you find some way to bring me here sooner so that I'll at least have some chance against him? He asked. I'm afraid that my hands were tied by our laws, Dumbledore replied. To have removed you from your aunt's home and to bring you here would have been considered as kidnapping. The tournament presented an opportunity, though. And once I enchanted the cup and ensured that your name came out of it, it was one which I was very glad to see that you took. And once you were here, I did all that I could to further your education and training. I ensured that you had the very best tutors to complement the outstanding teachers that Hogwarts has, and I endeavored to challenge you through the tasks of the TriWizard tournament, although you were less than helpful in that regard. What? You're the one who got me into this stupid tournament in the first place. You could have killed me. You made me walk out to face a dragon. How was I to know that I could talk to her? For all I knew, I was about to be eaten or roasted. And then Yao endeavored to challenge Methru the rest of the Triwiz, Harry asked, his eyes narrowed. You were the one who chose to put Daphne at the bottom of the lake just to motivate me. I was, and it succeeded, in however an unorthodox method, Dumbledore replied. It showed me that you would do whatever you could for those you cared for. And I'm guessing that you were behind the hedges forcing me onwards tonight as well, Harry challenged. Correct again, Harry. But this time Dumbledore frowned. Your early exit from the maze was most displeasing. If you are to be ready to face Voldemort once again, then you must learn to face challenges and overcome them. I did, Harry snapped. The hedges were preventing me from my goal, and I found a way to overcome it. Regardless, the tournament is over now, and it is imperative that we work towards furthering your education and preparing for Voldemort's return, Dumbledore stated. I and Hogwarts can help you there. So can the Dragon Reserves, Harry countered. They've offered to continue my education. But away from Britain, Harry, and that is unacceptable. What would happen if Voldemort was to return while you were still under contract in another county? Countless thousands could very well die while we waited for you to be released from your contract, Dumbledore pointed out. You want me to make a decision on a hypothetical maybe? Harry asked. I'm afraid that it is imperative that you do, Dumbledore replied. Harry could see how the rest of this conversation was going to go. Dumbledore would continue to insist that he remain in Britain, in Hogwarts even, regardless of Harry's personal preferences. The man was a manipulating bastard. He used an ancient artifact to manipulate Harry into choosing his world, and had been attempting to pull his strings ever since. And he was still doing it. All because of a stupid prophecy. Harry knew that he was relatively untrained, and if Dumbledore's theory that Voldemort would one day return was true, and he was forced to face the Dark Lord, that there was no way that he could survive. Harry desperately wanted out of the office and out of the castle and away from Dumbledore's influence. The decision that he'd been waffling over had finally been made, all thanks to Dumbledore, but Harry knew that it probably wasn't wise to mention that fact just yet. Look, I'm tired, and you've given me a lot to think about, he said. Very wise, Harry. It is never good to rush into important decisions like this. One must always weigh the options and decide what is the best for the most number of people. Doing what is right instead of what is easy, Dumbledore said, his eyes twinkling over his half-moon spectacles. With a nod, Harry stood. Thank you for the information, Headmaster. Good night. Good night, Harry, Dumbledore replied. We can talk more once your decision has been made about your future education. Yeah, right, Harry sarcastically thought as he strode towards the door. /0v0 / Sunday, 25 June 1995. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. All through breakfast, Harry tried to work Daphne out and found that he was failing abysmally. The cynical part of his mind told him that that was how it was supposed to be. He was a guy, she was a girl, and he'd once heard that the instant a girl even thought a guy was close to figuring her out, she would up and change all the rules and make him start again. But he'd been stealing glances at her throughout the meal, and she gave nothing away. There was no hint of awkwardness or nervousness, no hint whatsoever that anything had happened between them the night before. The conversation was natural, with no uncomfortable silences that begged to be filled. At least on her end. For him, he felt tongue-tied and clumsy, as though everything screamed out to the world that he was confused and unsure. Finally, breakfast was over, and they rose from the table. Daphne, could we go somewhere and talk, privately? Harry asked. There was only the very briefest of something in her eye, which told him that she knew exactly what he was asking. Sure, Harry, how about a walk around the lake? She replied. That's be brilliant, Harry replied. This time, as they walked through the castle and across the grounds, the silence between them seemed uncomfortable, as though the very air around them was thick and heavy. Their steps took them onto the well-trod path almost unconsciously, and Harry could feel his heart start to beat faster, harder, as though it wanted to burst out of his chest in his nervousness. With a touch on her hand, he stopped her. Why the Alcus Mellus night? He blurted. She laughed at him, her smile wide. Try again, Harry, and this time, slow it down so that I have a chance of actually understanding you. After a deep breath, he repeated his question. Why did you kiss me last night? She turned from him then, and gestured for him to join her as they continued to amble along the pathway. Have you decided, Harry? Are you going to sign the contract? She asked, instead of answering his question. Yeah, I have, and I will, Harry sighed. I need to. And you want to, Daphne added. But why need? Because I had a meeting with Dumbledore last night, and I found out a few things, Harry replied. Oh, such as? Daphne asked. Like he was the one who put my name in the goblet, and that he's been trying to manipulate me, to challenge me, to see what I'm made of and what I can do, Harry replied. He also told me that Voldemort's not as dead and gone as everyone thinks, and that he'll be back one day, and because of some stupid prophecy, that apparently I'm the only one who can vanquish him. Me, an untrained kid, defeat a powerful dark wizard. Oh, and get this, I'm supposed to be able to do it with love. Daphne stopped and stared at him, her blue eyes boring into his green ones. Dumbledore really told you all that, and he believes it. What does he want you to do? She asked. He wants to have me handy for if, and when Voldemort turns up again, not traipsing around the world where I'm of no use to him, Harry spat. I see, Daphne replied, and gestured for them to start walking again. And if it wasn't for Dumbledore, what would your decision have been? I don't know, Daph, Harry sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was leaning towards it, but... You want it, she answered for him. You love being able to talk to dragons, the things you'll see, the places you'll go. It's an adventure just waiting for you out there. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line. And you'd regret it for the rest of your life if you didn't go. I don't know, maybe, Harry conceded. But it means leaving here and Sirius and Hermione, Susan, Neville, and you. You can always come back to us, you know, she pointed out, once you've done adventuring. I guess, Harry replied, not convinced that the passage of time would allow him to come back to the same things, the same people. He'd be different, they'd be different, and who knows what would have happened between now and that subjective when. And to answer your question, Harry, that's why I kissed you, Daphne told him. I don't understand, Harry replied. I kissed you for the same reason that you have to go, that if I didn't, I'd always regret it, always wonder what it would have been like. I'm sure that I'll still wonder what might have been. But if you go now, you can come back, and who knows, she finished with a shrug. I'm glad you did, Daph, Harry told her quietly. Kiss me, that is. It was nice, I liked it. Me too, Harry, me too. /0v0 / Sun, 25 June 1995. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Nice to finally meet you properly, Mr. Potter, Alexander Velios, the head dragon handler of the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, said, shaking his hand. I'm sorry that we couldn't talk last night, Harry apologized. Alexander held up a hand. No need. I understand how these things can be. Now, have you decided what you're gonna do? Are you interested in signing a contract with the Dragon Reserves? That depends, Mr. Velios. What did you decide about the alterations that I asked to be made to the contract? Harry asked. The pay, time off, bonus, all of that, no worries at all, Alexander replied. As to you completing your levels, you agreed to cover the cost yourself, so that's no worries, providing that it don't impact on your Dragon Keeper responsibilities. Harry nodded and smiled. Now, as to the length of contract, Alexander replied. Are you certain that you won't sign on for either the original option until you finish your newts plus 1 year, or even simply until you finish your newts? I don't think that that's a good idea, Harry replied. That's a long, long time, and if either you or I decide that the job isn't a good fit for me, we'd both be stuck. No, I'd much prefer to sign until I get all my owls with an option of resigning after that. Alexander and Charlie shared a long look before Alexander sighed. If it wasn't for your Parselmouth ability and young Weasley here vouching for you, I'd tell you to get lost. But we haven't had a dragon talker working with the dragons for a very, very long time. So, you've got a deal, Mr. Potter. We'll offer the contract from 1 month from now, until you complete all of your owl examinations with the option of renewal after that. Brilliant, Harry exclaimed. Alexander pulled a roll of parchment from the inside of his robes and offered it to Harry, who spent the next 10 minutes reading it over. I just sign at the bottom, Harry asked. Yep, Alexander replied. Here, being a contract, you'll need to use a blood quill. Then I'll sign and Weasley'll sign as witness. Harry took the quill with distaste, remembering the way it stung the last time that he'd used one at Gringotts. Quickly, he signed his name before handing the quill back and spinning the contract around. Once Alexander and Charlie had also signed, the head dragon keeper tapped the scroll, creating a duplicate which he handed to Harry. "This is your copy in this," he said, pulling out a dragon tooth from his pocket and handing it over, "is a portkey to the reserve. Tap it with your wand and say, Ramaranth, and it'll bring you straight to us." "Thanks," Harry replied, smiling at the passphrase. "Right then. Congratulations, Mr. Potter, and we'll see you in a month's time," Alexander said, rising and shaking his hand. "See you, Harry," Charlie said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I look forward to working with you. /0v0 / Sun, 25 June 1995. The grounds, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It was a small group that moved slowly across the grounds of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. But no matter how slow they moved, the time came inevitably closer to when one of their number would have to part. Just inside the wards, only a few meters from the gates and the winged boars that sat upon them, the five stopped. "You've got everything?" Hermione asked. Harry nodded. "The reports from all my teachers and tutors," he smiled at that, considering who he was with, "are in my trunk, which is safely in my pocket." "And you won't be alone, will you?" Hermione continued. He smiled at her. "Stop worrying, Hermione. I'm an adult in case you've forgotten, even if I am younger than the four of you. And no, I won't be alone. Sirius is meeting me at the Leaky Cauldron and I'll be fluing straight there from the Three Broomsticks." "I'll miss you, Harry," Hermione said, flinging herself at him to hug the stuffing out of him. Once she finally let go, Neville moved forward and clasped his hand. "Take care of yourself, Harry. Dragons are dangerous, you know," he smiled. "I'll keep that in mind. Oh, and Nev, keep an eye out for letters," Harry said. "That goes for all of you, really, but Neville, you'll want to open yours pretty quickly. I'll be sending you a whole bunch of weird and exotic plants that I encounter on my travels." "Cheers, Harry," Neville beamed. "That means a lot." Harry pulled a letter from his pocket and handed it to Susan. "You know that you're supposed to wait until you've gone away before sending me letters, don't you, Harry?" Susan smiled. "Yeah, but that one's not for you. It's for your aunt. There's some information in there which I think she'll find very interesting," he replied. "I'll make sure she gets it," Susan promised. "Take care of yourself, Harry, and have fun." She, too, gave him a hug before stepping back. In fact, the three of them moved away slightly to give him and Daphne a small bit of privacy. "Well, I guess that this is it," Harry said, reaching out and capturing her hands in his. "Yeah, guess so," Daphne replied, and Harry could hear that she was only just holding herself together. "I'm going to miss you most of all, you know," he told her. "I'll write as often as I can." "You better, and you can be sure that I will, too," she promised. He leaned forward then and kissed her. It was long, sweet, and filled with everything that neither could say. Eventually they drew apart slightly, their foreheads lightly touching. "Goodbye, Harry," she whispered. "No, not goodbye. It's only farewell for now. We'll see each other again before you know it," Harry told her. And then, before he could change his mind, he drew away from her, their hands lingering together for as long as possible. Then, with a last wave to Neville, Susan, and Hermione, he turned and walked out of the gates of Hogwarts. A sudden flap and weight on his shoulder announced Hedwig arriving. "There you are, girl. I was wondering where you were," Harry murmured. "Well, are you ready for our next adventure? /0v0 / NB, if you like this story, check out my profile page where you can find all of my fanfiction stories. Also, there is a link to my Facebook page and my website where you will find all of my original stories as well.